tomorrow, President Biden leaves on his first foreign trip as commander-in-chief. He will attend next week's NATO summit, where he will have the chance to reset America's relationship with the organization after 4 years of former President Trump's combative stance against NATO. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg previewed that renewed relationship with a trip to the White House yesterday. And Secretary Jens Stoltenberg joins us now. Mr. Secretary, it's great to have you on the show. We want to hear what the goals are for strengthening the alliance, perhaps looking forward more than looking back in terms of America's relationship within the alliance.
We have now a unique opportunity to open a new chapter in the transatlantic bond, the bond between North America and Europe in NATO. And I had a very good meeting with President Biden yesterday, and he knows NATO very well. He knows Europe. I have worked with him in his previous capacities, and I'm really looking forward to welcoming him to Brussels to the NATO summit. And at that summit, we will agree an ambitious forward-looking agenda, NATO 2030, which is about how to adapt NATO to the future. In an age of global competition, we need to stand together in North America and Europe.
Mr. Secretary General, Joe Biden's talking about the importance of promoting democracy across Europe, across the world. How much of a challenge has been the rise of self-described illiberal democracies like Hungary, and also obviously a concern in Poland as well over the past 4 years? How important is that, and do you sense that that tide can be turned with the United States being more active in NATO, more active in Europe?
So we are 30 different nations in NATO from both sides of the Atlantic, and of course, and the different political parties in power. And of course, there are differences. But first of all, we have always been able to unite around our core task to protect and defend each other. This is good for Europe, but it's also good for the United States to have a strong NATO. No other major power has 29 friends and allies as the United States has in NATO, and that's not least important in the light of the challenges China poses to all of us. So that's the importance of NATO. Then, of course, there are differences, and I strongly believe that NATO is a platform to address those differences, to sit down and share our views and also our concerns. I have done that myself on issues like democracy, rule of law, because these are core values for NATO, and NATO is a platform also to address differences when we have them.
Yes, sir. Gene Robinson is with us and has a question for you. Gene.
Yeah, Mr. Stoltenberg, good to speak with you. You mentioned China and the challenge it poses. I wonder if you would also talk about Russia and the forces that are on the border with Ukraine, the continued occupation of the Crimean Peninsula. How going forward? I mean, is this the sort of the traditional posture of NATO is with a very wary eye toward Russia? But how should NATO look at this relationship in the near future?
We have to follow up on what we have called or defined as a dual-track approach to Russia. We need to be strong, we need to be firm, but at the same time, we need to talk to Russia. Because we have seen a pattern of aggressive behavior where Russia has invested heavily in new military capabilities, and not only that, but have used military power against or force against neighbors like Georgia and Ukraine. And of course, we have to react, and we have to be very firm when we see those kind of aggressive action. At the same time, we need to talk to them because Russia is our neighbor, and we need to strive for a better relationship. But even without a better relationship with Russia, we need to manage a difficult relationship with Russia, meaning to sit down and talk on issues like arms control, risk reduction, transparency on military activities along our borders to prevent any incidents or accidents. And therefore, one of the issues I discussed with President Biden yesterday was arms control. NATO allies welcomed the U.S. Decision to extend the New START treaty, limiting the number of long-range nuclear weapon systems. But we need to go further, include more weapon systems and also new technologies. And at some stage, we also need to include China in global arms control. So yes, the aggressive behavior of Russia is of great concern. We need to be strong, but also sit down and talk to them.
Mr. Secretary General, you were at the White House yesterday meeting with President Biden. I'm curious to know how different an experience that was than sitting down or negotiating with President Trump, who looked at the American relationship with NATO as a financial transaction, thought we were paying too much, and you were in the position of having to negotiate down how much the U.S. put in. How different is the approach of this administration to NATO than the previous?
Of course, they are two different presidents. Yes. At the same time, it is important for me as Secretary General to be able to work with the United States because the United States is the biggest NATO ally, and that was also the case for me over the previous 4 years. Having said that, I think that it has been a very consistent message from the United States over several different administrations, the need for what we call more or fairer burden sharing in NATO, meaning that European allies and Canada have to invest more. That was actually a decision we made together in 2014 under the Obama administration when Biden was vice president. And since 2014, our summit, we made that decision. All allies have invested more. And across Europe and Canada, they have added $260 billion extra US dollars over this period for defense. 7 consecutive years of increases. So we still have a way to go, but the good news is that the European allies and Canada are stepping up, and that Europe and North America are doing more together in NATO now than we have done for many years, with higher readiness, with combat-ready battle groups and eastern part of the alliance, and one of them also led by the United States. So this demonstrates transatlantic unity in praxis. By fair burden sharing and more NATO activities.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary General, last week we had America's former National Security Advisor John Bolton on, who was talking about the Russian threat, Russian expansion, talking about what happened in Georgia in 2008, what happened in Ukraine in 2014. And he believed the United States needed to work with NATO to expand NATO membership in certain areas. Do you believe that NATO, expanding NATO, would be a good way to check Russian aggression in the future?
So NATO has expanded, including recently. Just over the last few years, we have added in 2 more members: North Macedonia just a year ago, and Montenegro 2-3 years ago. 3 years ago. So NATO's door remains open, and we have demonstrated that by inviting in 2 new members. And if you look at the broader picture, actually one of the biggest success stories of our alliance is the enlargement. At the end of the Cold War, there were 16 members of NATO. Today we have almost doubled that number to 30. And the enlargement of NATO has been extremely important to spread democracy, freedom across Europe. We have some countries which are aspiring for NATO membership. Ukraine, Georgia, we are working with them. We have told them that they should focus on reform to meet the NATO standards, to fight corruption. We help them, we support them. And first of all, that's important in itself. It makes them stronger and more resilient societies by investing in reform. And second, it moves them gradually towards membership.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, thank you very much for being on the show this morning.